Hello and welcome to yet another build guide video, this time Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing. This one is a little phenomenal gem that can bring you up to endgame pace as well, pretty easily, sub 50 divines, a very good solid all-arounder build. Now, as it says, it's a Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing, so let me just explain the gems in Notion. So we have the regular one, which is the Poisonous Concoction. Poisonous Concoction says this: throws a bottle that explodes to deal unarmed attack damage in an area and has a chance to poison. Can consume charges from a life flask to add further damage. Requires an empty main hand and no offhand weapon. This one you can level up from level 12. I think you get it from like Brutus or a little bit before Brutus. So you can start leveling it up. It has amazing scaling. I will have everything in POB, all the leveling routes, everything set up and sorted, nothing to worry about, and the gem swap later. But this also does this: consumes one charge per projectile fired from one life flask if possible, and added chaos damage equal to 3% of flask's recovery amount if charges were consumed from a life flask. Now, this is how it looks. You toss some flasks. You toss a lot of flasks, actually, and they will all explode in a certain area. Here is one little thing. If you remove the volley and if you remove the GMP, you toss one flask. If you add GMP, you will toss flasks in like an arc. And if you do volley instead of GMP, you are tossing flasks directly. They will overlap and they will apply poison. Now, poison does not have a cap inherently, more on that a little bit later, so you want to increase the duration of poison so you can stack those sticks exponentially. It just grows in damage more. When poison gets applied, the damage gets applied over that amount of time, and then if you have increased duration, that DPS, original DPS, just gets extended, and that can all stack up to poison cap or until your game crashes, which is completely possible with this build. Anyways, Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing. This one says, throws a single bottle that releases a burst when it hits the ground, dealing unarmed attack damage in an area with a chance to poison. The skill chains, bouncing randomly to deal damage multiple times, can consume charges from a life flask to add further damage, and requires an empty main hand weapon. Now, for Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing, when you throw one Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing, it bounces off the ground. It can chain off the ground, or it can chain between two enemies, or one enemy ground, depending on how many projectiles you have. Additional line, modifiers to number of projectiles instead apply to the number of times this skill chains and gets 2 inherent chains. So if you add more projectiles, like GMP and greater volley, you will get more chains. Now it has a chance to poison, crit chance, base radius. Projectiles can chain when impacting the ground, and they chain in random directions. However, if you have enemies between, they will kind of prioritize enemies more than chaining in random directions, and they can, of course, overlap, so you can throw more. But this one consumes 8 charges per projectile fired from one life flask if possible. So instead of 1 charge on life flask per projectile, this one picks up 8 charges per projectile fired from one life flask. So there's that one. And of course, because we fire 1 projectile and we have all the chains, so it's basically 8. You technically want to have 8 projectiles, added projectiles, for this to be worth it. And then added chaos damage equal to 15% of flask's recovery amount if charges were consumed from a life flask, and chance to inflict withered. Withered is not on a regular one. However, this one does deal increased added chaos damage equal to 3% of flask's life recovery. Level 1 though. Now, when it comes to Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing, if you add greater volley, it will still throw 1 flask, it will just chain more. If you add GMP as well, which is supported by both, it does this. And then you can toss it more. And you can make a pretty significant area of damage that you can do. Now, what enhances this skill? This skill is enhanced by Life Flask. What does a Life Flask need? More recovery. As much recovery as possible. So, as I have here, I have 30% Divine Life Flasks. Those are the Life Flasks, not Eternal. Divine Life Flasks are the flasks that start with the highest base life recovery. I have 3 of those with 30% quality. These need to drop normally, or you can buy them off a player. It's usually 1 divine for these, and then you roll them until you hit tier 1 increased amount recovered and reduced recovery rate. Reduced recovery rate is irrelevant. Now you want to have 2 to 3 of these flasks because just you can see how much it depletes. It goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you will always have regen flasks because that's how the build starts. The additional modifiers are Corrupted Blood on 1, removes curses on 2, and immunity to poison on 3. However, I have rarely pressed removes curses and immunity to poison. I've mostly pressed Corrupted Blood immunity and regular bleeding just because that one is actually hurting us quite significantly. Now, the other 2 flasks are basically quality of life flasks, which is 1, 10% chance to suppress spell damage and phasing. That's a quartz flask. And chance to gain flask charge when you deal a crit strike, increase attack speed during effect, and of course use when charges reach full. Because we are crit based build, we don't have crit multiplier, but we have crit. We can gain a lot of flask charges this way. For cheaper, you want to get like lower percentage modifiers. However, phasing is very useful because phasing is another layer of defense where you move through an enemy without collision. Extremely good thing to have. And the last one is Silver Flask, which is Onslaught Flask. Just gives us extra attack, cast, and movement speed. We are an attack skill, and we have chance to gain flask charge when you deal a crit strike, and evasion rating during effect just for a little bit of extra defense. Now, the tags on the gem are attack, AoE, chaos, projectile, and chaining. Now let's go over the gem supports and gems in general. This build will work with regular Poisonous Concoction. However, in order to make Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing work the best, you can gear swap pretty easily, pretty cheaply at the beginning of the league, so it is a viable league starter as well. However, some things are a little bit tricky if you want to apply extra curses and things, and that's what you will need. This build also works on a lot of Frenzy charges, Affliction charges, Endurance charges, and 4 power charges. But on gear in just a second. Let's go over the gems. We have Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing, GMP, Greater Volley, for more projectiles. You can do Awakened GMP, but too expensive. You don't need 1 extra projectile, you're completely fine. Life tap support because you want to cast it from life and it gives more damage while you have a life tap. It's a really good way to use it. If you don't have life tap, it costs like 35 mana, and for that then you have to do some shenanigans here and there for mana cost, which I do not recommend. Life tap is a pretty good support to have. Awakened Void Manipulation or regular Void Manipulation gives us just more damage, and Awakened Unbound Ailments or regular Unbound Ailments, as that gives us increased duration of ailments and they deal more damage. Basically, all is for poison/chaos. Like all is done for that, and basically, you want to have as long of poisons as possible with as high as damage, and the damage is actually scaling pretty well. If you want, you can get the 21 Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing. That's completely fine. It's great as a skill. Let's go over auras. We have Grace as an aura that's basically for defense, for evasion rating. We have Enlighten support. We have Purity of Elements, which gives us a lot of elemental resistances, 34 plus 5 from the quality, immunity to ailments, very important, and we have Malevolence, because it's just more damage over time in general. Now, in our boots, we have Arrogance, Support, and Precision. That gets reserved on life, because we need Precision for the accuracy and for the critical, keep in mind the skill is an attack. It is not a spell, it's an attack. You need accuracy. And then we have automation and blood rage, just so that we always have blood rage and generation of frenzy charges and like lifesteal and such. So all of the bonuses for for this one helps. Attack, physical damage, yes, it's a little bit low, but this is basically our frenzy generator. And in maps, we are always going to have our energy shield, which is around 1700. So nothing to worry about. We will always regen energy shield. More on that a tad bit later. For our movement skills, we have Shield Charge, Life Tap, and Frost Blink. Shield Charge is basically charge with your shield, hit them with physical damage, and that's it. However, when you Shield Charge, you can stop mid-shield charge and basically animation cancel to do Frost Blink. So that helps as well for some certain things. Now, the reason why Frostblink is an instant skill. It's always an instant skill. Lower cooldown the more enemies are around you, and it's better than Flame Dash or regular dash, even for using, like you use it only to skip terrain. Your main movement skill is basically Shield Charge with a lot of Frenzy charges. You won't feel the need to have like a Quicksilver Flask and things. It's pretty quick in maps. However, you've seen me do Wave 30 Simulacrum. That's where this build excels. We'll get to that. And last but not least, one thing that you need on the helmet is the trigger socketed spells when you focus with a quarter of a second cooldown, and that's where we put our curses. Life tap support, we use all the life taps possible. Enfeeble, Poacher's Mark, and Despair. Enfeeble so that we can have cursed enemies less accuracy, and cursed they deal less damage in general, so that's what we want, because that's a layer of defense. We want Poacher's Mark to get frenzy charges, of course, when slain, and cursed enemies have 5% chance to gain a frenzy charge when hit. The reason why we both have Poacher's Mark and Blood Rage is so Blood Rage works on AoE. It won't give us frenzy charges unless something dies, but Poacher's Mark cannot be applied that often, as Focus has 4-second duration, so you cast it once, and then 4-second duration, then 8-second cooldown time, which is every 12 seconds we can cast that one on enemies. So it's not reliable source on AoE for mapping for us to gain frenzy charges. However, it's a wonderful source for us to get frenzy charges on a single target, on a boss and such. So it's a wonderful tool there. And we have Despair, which is basically lowering chaos resistance of enemies in the radius, and it also gives us increased effective curse for the quality. So those are the gems and gem supports and links. Now, how does this work with the passive skill tree? I'll do passive skill tree, and then we are going to go through gearing process. This may be a little bit of a complicated build, but it's quite simple if you follow the steps. I have outlined all the steps in the POB. I'll cover that later, nothing to worry about. So you start as Shadow, and then you go into being a Trickster. And Trickster has a lot of things that we would need. Ascendancies. Your first ascendancy would be Polymath. More damage for each different type of master you have allocated. Recover on kill is whatever, but more damage for each different type of master you have allocated. We have like 8 or 10 different masteries allocated, and that's where we get a significant chunk of damage. That's first lab. Lab 2, Escape Artist. Evasion rating per 1 maximum energy shield on equipped helmet, and +1 to maximum energy shield per 6 evasion rating on equipped body armor. This is where we get our smaller layer of defense. However, it can be a greater layer of defense if you go with a helmet that has more energy shield than evasion. But we do need spell suppress, so we need a hybrid. For the chest is basically evasion rating, energy shield, the restless ward. More on that in a second. Third lab, Soul Drinker. 2% of damage leached as energy shield. This is as of damage. It's not like of any other type. It's damage, all damage that you do. 20% increase attack and cast speed while leeching energy shield, and the energy shield leech effects are not removed when energy shield is filled, which basically means we have perma leech. That's very important, which means we have attack and cast speed while leeching energy shield, and we have it permanently. It's basically like free extra onslaught. And Uber Lab is where we get the charge duration and +2 to maximum frenzy charges. However, before Uber Lab, I recommend playing regular Poisonous Concoction, but after getting Uber Lab, I recommend swapping to Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing because it just has better scaling with frenzy charges. It's way, way, way better, in my opinion, versus regular Concoction. So you start your tree in regular basis, you pick up all the masteries, but one keystone thing is very important to be mentioned, which is Ghost Dance. Ghost Dance says, cannot recover energy shield to above evasion rating. We are an evasion rating based build. We have 34k evasion roughly, which means we cannot recover energy shield over 30k, but we have 1700. Every 2 seconds, gain a Ghost Shroud up to maximum of 3, and when hit, lose a Ghost Shroud to recover energy shield equal to 3% of your evasion rating. Now, if we do the math, 3% of 30,000 is 1,000. So we have basically a lot of recovery that we can cover. Or 3? No, 3. Oh, math. Heavy math. 30k times 0.03, 900. I calculated with the rest. 900 energy shield. Let's say 1,000 energy shield. That's completely fine. Math failure. Lovely. Anyways, we do that, and that is basically here. We have 3 Ghost Shrouds, and Ghost Shrouds replenish over time, and we have like every 2 seconds. So every time we get that, we have an additional layer of recovery. That's why we cannot run less recovery or no recovery mods. Now, when it comes to everything else, we basically take the poison nodes, flask nodes, and we go down to projectile mastery. I have noted this in the POB itself, but let me mention this. Projectile mastery that says projectiles deal 20% increased damage with hits and ailments for each time they have chained is almost an exponential level of damage increase for Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing, because we have total of, where does it say, 10 chains or something? I'm blind, that's why I wear glasses. So we have projectiles chain, random directions, whatever. We have like 10 chains that we can add, and this gives us the last projectile gets 200% increased damage with hits and ailments. It's a very, very, very huge damage boost. So projectile mastery, this one is mandatory, and it's very, very lovely. Now, how do we generate endurance charges? We have Disciple of the Unyielding, chance to gain endurance charge on kill, increased damage per endurance charge, and we of course have chance to gain frenzy charge on kill while we are there with damage here. Now let's go over the gearing segment. Gearing segment, unfortunately, as I've written in the POB here, there is quite a hefty shopping list that you basically need for the build to function on almost the cap level as possible. It's not too expensive, however, that is what the build requires so that we can use some modifiers to our advantage. Now, what does that mean? What do we need? Because we're generating frenzy charges, endurance charges, however, we are not generating power charges, we need Ralakesh's Impatience. You do not need the implicit, by the way. Ralakesh's Impatience are boots that count us as having maximum number of endurance, frenzy, and power charges. That's basically it. So all the time we count as having those. That basically means we just get the bonuses of them for basically free. So there's that. Well, bonuses, number bonuses for free for maximum charges. You still have to generate them to get the actual bonuses of the charges. So this one just gives you the actual maximum. Now, that we have that and we count as maximum, we need Olesia's Delight. Olesia's Delight is a Maven belt that gives us 1 maximum frenzy charge, movement speed, cold resistance, evasion rating, but modifiers to minimum frenzy charges instead applied to minimum affliction charges, and maximum affliction charges is equal to maximum frenzy. However, gain affliction charges instead of frenzy charges. What do affliction charges do? Thank you for asking. Players have 8% more damage with ailments and 8% more effect of non-damaging ailments per affliction charge. As we have around 10, that's basically 80% more. So we get that. And instead of frenzy charges, we generate these. Now, how do we get extra frenzy charges? We get that from Asenath's Gentle Touch Silk Gloves. These are not expensive to get +1 to maximum frenzy charges. These are great as they give us curse enemies with temp chains on hit. Non-aura curses you inflict are not removed from dying enemies, and enemies near corpses affected by your curses are blinded, and enemies killed near corpses affected by your curses explode, dealing 3% of their life as physical damage. How does this work? You have a group of monsters. The white monsters are going to die first, then they're going to start chaining the explosion of their health, and that's how everyone dies around. These are basically bis. Now you can add additional curse on these, which can be whatever, or you can do attack crits, however you'd like. These are pretty much fine. Then, how do we get those extra curses? As you've seen, we have a lot of curses. We get that with Anathema, Moonstone Ring. That basically ring gives us intelligence, cast speed, gain a chance to gain a power charge when you cast a curse spell, and your curse limit is equal to your maximum power charges. We use this ring for technically 2.5 mods. Half is basically the implicit for max energy shield, but 2 mods, intelligence, and your curse limit is equal to your maximum power charges. This is very important because on the tree we pick up our 4th power charge so that we can have 4 curses. Those 4 curses are Temp Chains, Enfeeble, Despair, Poacher's Mark. Those are 4 curses. Mark spells count as curse. You can see the 3rd tag, physical spell, curse mark. So those are the 4 curses that we do. If you don't pick up Anathema, you're just going to do 1 curse. So then this whole curse setup is irrelevant. You don't even need to use it. Just use Temp Chains here and you'll be fine. Temp Chains is basically a curse that reduces action speed by 15% or 9% of rare unique targets and makes other effects on the target expire 40% slower. That means our poisons last for that longer, which is great as we want to have longer lasting poisons, so our DPS stays the same, but it's over our DPS, so damage per second, stays the same, but it's applied over a longer period, totaling our damage, like we're doubling our damage or even more. And then last but not least, we have Replica Badge of the Brotherhood. This one is also another thing that we use for literally only one thing, which is your maximum endurance charges is equal to your maximum frenzy charges. So we have frenzy charges into affliction charges. But we have maximum endurance charges is equal to your maximum frenzy charges, which means we have 10 endurance, 10 frenzy, and 4 power charges. Well, 10 affliction charges. So that's how it basically works. All of the rest things on Replica Badge of the Brotherhood are literally worthless. We allocate melding just to get extra life and max life as max energy shield. Of course, we are using the Restless Ward as an armor. This build has a lot of uniques, so pay attention to that. This gives us evasion, energy shield, max life, movement speed per frenzy charge. That helps a lot, especially as relic caches don't have movement speed on them. So movement speed per frenzy charge, regenerates 75 life per second per endurance charge. We have 10, that's 750 life, and increased endurance, frenzy, and power charge duration, which gives us some silly 30-40 second charges duration, which is phenomenal. Now, we generate endurance charges basically on kill. So there's that. That's why this build is great for doing simulacrums. The rest of the gear is quite simple. You can get Olesia's Delight with increased area of effect that we have here, or you can do to all elemental resistances, which I would strongly recommend. Shield is chance to suppress spell damage crafted with essences for resistance, life, and mana. Mana is irrelevant. Life is important. The ring is very expensive, so I have the whole breakdown in POB that you should please follow, because this ring was 15 to 20 divines at the time of purchase slash making it. However, you can alleviate the costs of this ring by doing something else. I'll show you that in a second. And we have here a Val Mask, which was basically crafted with Spell Suppress Damage Fractured mod and maximum life essences, as we wanted to get as much life as possible with like Fire Res and things like for defenses, and trigger socketed spells when you focus. Mana reservation efficiency is basically mandatory on the implicit, and physical damage taken recouped as life. That basically means whenever we get hit, partial hit gets recouped back as life. Now, on the tree, we have unique jewels. We don't have rare jewels in this one. If you are playing without Forbidden Flame and Flesh, then you can put up some rare jewels. The first unique jewel that is extremely important, as we use it for a stat stick primarily, and then for resistance stat stick secondarily, is Lethal Pride. I have listed these Lethal Prides that have 3 of 20% to fire resistance modifiers in the POB, so you have the trade links there. Please use them. What is the catch with this? We need basically more strength and more intelligence because of the other stuff in the build. We need a lot of strength that we cannot get anywhere else other than on a shield or on the mask, depending on where you want to craft it, and maybe on a ring. And we get extra resistances here. So I have 3 resistances, 120 fire, 220 fire, 320 fire. That's 60% fire resistance. My current resistances on this build with the gear are 128, oops, pardon, or it's not active, 169 fire resistance, which is basically double and a little bit more of the cap. So you can freely take one of these fire modifiers, even 2 of these, and then adjust yada yada. So you can get a cheaper ring. That's what you can do. If you get all elemental resistances on the implicit, that's what you can gain too. Now, the next important part is the Perandus Pact. Perandus Pact is an unique jewel which gives you passive skills in radius, also grants 6% increased chaos damage. So every single passive skill here gives us increased chaos damage. Very good jewel, sometimes cheap, sometimes expensive. Then we have Watcher's Eye. Watcher's Eye, you just need 1 mod on this. You need chance to suppress spell damage while affected by grace. You can do the lowest roll. It doesn't matter. 12% does not matter. Everything is sorted out in the POB. I've spent a lot of time doing this and like optimizing it as much as possible. So buy the lowest one, buy the cheapest one. The secondary mod does not matter. I use this one from my previous build. So this cannot be blinded while affected by precision. That's completely irrelevant. Who cares? Whatever you want to get, you get. If you want to get something expensive, instead of cannot be blinded while affected by precision, you gain flask charges on crit with precision. That's basically an extremely good one. Or you can get Malevolence, damage over time multi. And then we get to either extremely cheap or extremely expensive part of the build, which is Forbidden Flame and Forbidden Flesh for Noxious Strike. Noxious Strike is an Ascendancy that gives us 40% chance to poison on hit, 5% increased poison duration for each poison you have inflicted recently up to a maximum of 100%, and recover 0.5% of life per poison affecting enemies you kill. Now, we basically use this as 40% poison chance, as then we can like respec from this poison node to here to get extra damage even. However, this gives us exponential damage increase as our poisons last longer, as I explained, and they deal more damage. However, sometimes these jewels are 50 chaos total, and sometimes they're 100 divines. I bought these 2 for 18. At the start of the league, these were 80. Nowadays, they're, I don't know, 5 to 10 for one and 15 to 20 for the other. These are not needed. However, they are great for the help on the build. If you count all the gear and everything that I've purchased, that I've done with the adjustments in PoB, that basically just removes like resistances and wiggles them around, the build costs slightly sub 50 divines, and that's with the generous stuff. So this total build cost 65 divines at the time of making, which was at the beginning of June 2024. However, this build can be done under 50 divines if you follow my PoB to the T. Now, let's go into the PoB, as this has been a very long one, and I'm going to go from the Act 1 into everything else. As with every PoB of mine, everything is labeled. Acts are labeled and numbers later are labeled too. Please follow all the labels. Act 1 here on the tree, skills, Act 1, items, Act 1. Please follow the PoB properly, that is properly labeled. It will help you immensely. I also leveled this build, you can see that on my VODs, with Blight Contagion into Blight Contagion, Essence Drain into swapping to Concoction in Act 2, and so on. So I have everything sorted there. So Act 1 through Act 10, this is with regular Concoction, then white maps with regular Concoction, yellow maps where you prepare to swap and you do Uber Lab, cheap gear swap for bouncing, bouncing main swap, upgrades 1 which are less than 10 divines, upgrades 2 which are less than 10 divines, upgrades 3 which are expensive upgrades, and my current tree. The most expensive upgrade is the Cluster Jewel for Wicked Pole, Unspeakable Gifts, and Dark Ideation, because Unspeakable Gifts is enemies you kill have 10% chance to explode, dealing 25% of their maximum life as chaos damage. This one is 30 to 35 divines easily. So I didn't include that in a regular build because that would be too expensive. However, there is an upgrade path which I have added. That also includes all the skills. Everything is sorted. Not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Everything is there, and my current gems, all of them are sorted. Keep in mind, upgrades expensive. It does say auras with Enlighten 4, so pay attention, please. And then we have for items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all to 10. I am also mentioning to upgrade the flasks. Please read the notes in the PoB. This PoB is beginner friendly, league start friendly, beginner friendly, like all of my builds. Please read the PoB. All the notes. It's mucho importante. Yes, thank you. So, Act 6, 7, 8 to 10, 1 to 2, which is basically the same thing as we go here 1 to 2, regular Concoction. And it's like low investment. Low investment means under 100 chaos. I have also noted that here, under 100 chaos budget, basically how much it can be for league start and so on, everything is included. And then cheap gear swap for bouncing, that's basically it. That's added here with approximate things that you can do, not approximate prices. Prices, of course, vary. You just need to fill in the required things. You also need to do this one here, cheap gear swap. Then bouncing main swap, upgrades, and of course upgrades that are done. Everything is mentioned that is done, so pay attention to what is added to the build compared to the previous version. Upgrades 1, upgrades 2, upgrades 3, which are the expensive ones, and then of course my current gear. Now, I will of course include all of the things in the description below. I just need to finish the configuration. That's basically it, with all the major gods and minor gods that you can do. General thing, Soul of Solaris, Abrath, Reslatha, those three are basically all good. The reason why: Solaris, Fizz damage reduction while there is only one nearby enemy and 20% chance to take 50% less area damage from hits. Reduced ally damage taken if you haven't been hit. We are dodge based. Take no extra damage from crits if you have taken a crit. That's our crit immunity basically. Chance to avoid ally ailments from crit strikes. This can also mean from physical crits for bleeding and for poison as well. Abrath if you want to do Searing Exarch, unaffected by Burning Ground. And of course Reslatha because Life Flasks gain charges every 3 seconds if you haven't used a Life Flask recently. Which also means if you haven't used Life Flask recently, Life Flasks will gain silly amount of charges as we are not using. What does it mean to use a life flask? It means to physically press the button to use the flask. So Raislata is always active, and of course enemies you've hit recently have reduced life regeneration rate is always a good thing. Now, that will cover everything Poisonous Concoction of Bouncing Edition. This is 0 to hero, from literal 0 to literal 30 wave simulacrum and stuff. Here's one thing. Mapping is fast. It's decently fast. I would recommend doing Ritual and Ultimatum and Harvest, mechanics that basically enemies are around you where you just don't have to aim the skill. You just toss the skill and the skill will bounce off the enemies. So small arenas, very good. Bigger roamer things, not as good, as you still need to apply these poison stacks, but if the arena is small, you're going to have a lot of luck. This build can also clear regular bosses. I haven't tried Uber bosses, there's no point to. It can clear tier 17 maps, however, I never showcase tier 17 maps as they are extremely iffy to do so, but it can clear tier 17s. So this covers everything. Sorry that this was another longer build guide. I hope you've liked it. If you have, please do give the video a like, sub if you don't mind. Please do also join our members. Thank you so much for joining members as well. If you do, that's completely fine. If you don't, thank you so much for watching. Hope you had a great time, and I will see you in the next PoE stream or video. Have a good one. Thank you once again for being awesome. Stay awesome, and thanks for watching.